Yo, what's up guys, Lotsana here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Hero Sword. Specifically, I'm going to be responding to Reaconteur's video on the topic where he encouraged his viewers to stop using the Hero Sword. And I'm going to explain why the Hero Sword is better than he made it out to be. If you believe that I won this argument at the end of the video, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. You see, Reaconteur is a chronic liar, and he makes his living by scamming his viewer base. For example, one of the claims that he often makes in his videos to prove that he's a good player and that you should take his advice is that he's the number 68th Sekiro player in the world. However, when I asked him to show me his rankings, it became very clearly apparent that he was lying about his accomplishments and he was actually ranked 69th. I know this because one of his friends actually spied on him and they ratted him out, and here's a clip of him admitting the truth.
You know, I'm actually the number 69th Sekiro player in the world, but I always say 68th because everyone's gonna believe me anyway. I'm on the leaderboard, right?
Reaconteur is the owner of Deepwoken info, that's why he thinks that people will believe whatever he says. But his actual knowledge of the game is questionable at best. In VC once, he told me that he was gonna put an insignia gem on a strong left because it decreases the wind up. However, experienced players will know that the insignia gem doesn't decrease the wind up of your move, it decreases the wind up of your next move. That's why you put it on something that's easy to hit, like Flame Blind. He also told me that Wind Gem decreases the cooldowns of your moves, and we all know that's what the Blessed Gem does. You see, Reaconteur is not the most knowledgeable person when it comes to Deepwoken, and his uninformed take on the Hero Swords proves that. Like I said before, the central argument to Reaconteur's video was that you should stop using the Hero Sword because there were better options and it wasn't worth using. Let's dismantle every one of his claims and see where he went wrong. Reaconteur starts off by conceding that the Hero Sword is useful because it gives the user the option to have 100 points to put into extra stats.
The Hero's Blade has pretty similar stats to the default sword, except it scales on your elemental stat. This is good because it allows you to have an extra 100 points to put into any stat or stats that you want.
However, he quickly brushes past all of the advantages of using a Hero Sword and he downplays how important this is. Having the extra 100 stats is not just extra 100 stats, it means that you have more access to legendary and rare talents. You have better mantra selection as you don't have to roll into a weapon mantra. You can easily fulfill the requirements to become a Vision Shaper or Blind Seer without it negatively impacting your build. You see, with the extra 100 stats you can become a jack of all trade. You can have all of the good talents in all of the attributes except for weapon. And despite having that crazy upside, the only disadvantage that you're at is that you have a slightly weaker weapon. Reaconteur does not mention any of this in his video though, because he knows that it will only weaken his arguments. Reaconteur then goes on to give his opinion about the actual stats of the blade.
However, the blade itself is not a very good weapon outside of the damage. It's average in basically every category, and it's honestly not really worth using.
Did I hear this right? He said that the blade is average apart from its damage. The damage output is the most important part of the weapon. If it does a lot of damage, then you can kind of excuse the rest of the stats being mediocre, considering the fact that it gives such an upside. 33 damage on a sword that requires 0 medium weapon? Count me in. I get that the attack speed is slightly slower than a regular sword, but it's still good enough to not really be too noticeable. Reaconteur then goes on to make what is probably his most valid claim in this video, which is that hero swords are worse because they can't be enchanted.
If you want a perfect balance build, it's good, but Hero's Blades have a few issues. First of all, they can't be enchanted, which leaves you at a large disadvantage in cases where you're fighting players who have enchanted weapons, or even just stronger weapons like the Shattered Katana.
While it is true that hero swords cannot be enchanted and this is a disadvantage, for a lot of people it's not even a consideration, because most people don't actually get their hands on late game enchanted weapons. And trust me, it's much better to use a hero sword than something like a wild Shotel. Even in cases when you're fighting people with endgame enchanted weapons, you still have 100 stat points on them.
Having such a large disadvantage on people because you're using the Hero's Blade kinda sucks, especially because the Hero's Blade is really meant for mantra spam.
Reaconteur then explains that the hero sword is meant for mantra spam, and while that is one playstyle you can adopt when using the Hero's Blade, it's not the only use and it's not even the most effective use. The most effective use of the other 100 points is putting them into stats that you wouldn't have enough points to invest into, like charisma and strength and getting the good talents. Hero's Blades to Reaconteur is the antithesis of an M1 playstyle, but for someone like me it's not. As you saw in my Lightning Cloak build, I've made a build which relies mainly on M1s for my damage, but it makes use of the Hero's Blade because the extra points help me get good talents.
So, how should you be using the Hero's Blade? Well, the best thing to do is go 100 magic stat and then put 50 into 4 other stats. Out of everything, I would recommend putting 50 in every stat except for either willpower or charisma, and maybe agility.
Reaconteur mentions that it's a good idea to use the Hero Sword by putting 50 into 4 stats, and what he's suggesting is completely unoptimal. If you know the game, then you know that putting 50 into all of the stats is not a good idea because some of the stats don't even require that much. For example, you can get all of the good intelligence talents at 40, you can get all of the good agility talents at 35, so why would you get 50 and waste your points?
As a whole, it's really just not worth using unless you're a worse player and rely on spamming mantras, which most Hero Sword users definitely do. However, mantra spam is not very effective in ganks or when fighting players who are outright better than you. Hero Sword is designed for a playstyle that doesn't work very efficiently and hasn't really worked since Deepwoken released.
So Reaconteur makes 2 claims here. One, that Hero Sword builds are only good for people who want to spam mantras, which I disproved by my whole existence of my Lightning Cloak build. That build was pretty optimal, it relied on M1s for damage, and it had the Hero Sword. Reaconteur explains that mantra spamming is not good against good players, and it's not effective in ganks. And practically speaking, none of these 2 things are true. Good players often get thrown off when you constantly use different mantras because they have different timings. And mantras, especially AoE mantras, are incredibly effective in ganks due to the fact that they get thrown out at random and they're really hard to focus on and parry.
This is because people were a lot worse at the game back when Hero Sword was a meta. Now, the only people actually using the Hero Sword over weapons like Shattered Katana, which to be fair I would also go as far to say is overrated, but the people still using Hero Swords have builds from a forgotten meta, or they're just freshies who think it's still a good weapon and they can use it at level 1.
Reaconteur mentions the fact that the reason why people stopped using Hero Sword is because the meta changed, and while he is right that the meta changed, that's not the reason why people stopped using the weapon. The reason why people stopped using the weapon was because it received several nerfs. Despite that, the weapon still remains good to this day, and it's very slept on by the community. The Deepwoken community in general has a very short attention span, and if something receives a nerf, they're immediately going to change off it, even though it's still good.
Now, in the end, I would never recommend the Hero's Blade to anyone, since there's always something better for your build. Wind literally has a better Hero's Blade, being the Curved Blade of Wind, and Shadow has Crypt Blade. I guess if you're not heavy, then you can't use Crypt Blade, and you gotta go Hero's Sword of Shadow. But why would you do that?
You wanna know why someone would choose a Hero's Sword over the Crypt Blade or the Curved Blade of Wind? First, because there may not be Wind or Shadow, and second, because they don't have to put the extra 100 points into medium or heavy. That's the same reason that I've been saying for the past 8 minutes. That is basically all of Reaconteur's video. I hope I could convince you guys that I was right on this one. If you agree or disagree with me, then let me know in the comments. Reaconteur, if you're watching this video, I challenge you to a boxing match because I'm sick of you misleading your fans. If you guys want to see him accept the challenge, then go to the comment section of his latest video and spam Lord Sendo W. That's gonna be it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.